So when you download the file, there will be a zip file, and once you unzip it, this is what you'll see. There are two different folders, one called camera icons and one called logos. The first thing you're going to want to do is open up this font download instructions HTML file. Inside this file, there's a link to the YouTube video that you're watching right now, as well as the download links for all the different free fonts that I've used. Go ahead and download and install all these different free fonts before you actually use the set. So once you go in there, all the fonts are fully live and you can easily edit them. So inside these folders, I'm going to open up the camera icons folder first. There's a camera icons EPS, Photoshop file, Illustrator file, and then an Illustrator file saved down to CS2. And inside the logos file, there's a logos.eps, a logos.psd, and then there's a Creative Cloud version of the logos, a logos version for CS2, or anything below Creative Commons essentially, and a logo is outlined, and the outlined is saved down to CS2, and I've outlined all the different strokes I've used in the file in case you have any issues with that. So I have right here open, and I do recommend that if you have Illustrator, you use Illustrator to use these. I just think it's a better program for the job. But if you have Photoshop, that works just fine too. There's just some slight differences that I'll go over. So when you open up this, and this is the Creative Commons version, but the CS2 version looks just the same. There are the 14 different logos, and a few things to think about when you're using these. I didn't group them, number one. So the first thing you want to do if you want to use one, maybe just use a selection tool, which is a black arrow right here on your toolbar. And you can either drag it off so you can work on it separately or copy and paste it into a new document. But I'm actually going to select one of these that has a effect applied to the overall type. For example, this one that says wildlife photography. I can go ahead and using the type tool, select over the word wildlife. I'll just type in different because it's something easy to do. And also something to note with this particular font, you see how it has this outline? If I were to type different using all caps, it would take away that outline. So if you don't want that outline, you can go ahead and just type in all caps instead of lowercase. But if you do want that outline around the type here, type in lowercase. And I'll go ahead and do that. And as you can see, it's just a little bit too big for this box I've created here. So I'm going to select this little stroke outline right here, just pull it out a little bit past this way and pull it out a little bit past this way. And then I'm also going to take, there's these two lines that have an effect applied. I'm going to select the endpoints using the direct selection tool, and that is the white arrow by default. And once you do that, you can just select both these and pull them out just a tiny little bit there. So I'm going to do the same thing over here. Select these two, and I'm just trying to figure out where this endpoint falls. I know it's right around here somewhere. So right here, and then the other one's up top right here, and I'm going to drag these out. But what to think about with these effects that are applied, so like for instance on this word different as well as on this word nature, you want to make sure you have window appearance open. So go to window and then appearance. Appearance is near the top, and on my particular screen, the appearance window is right here. And as you can tell when I have this selected, there is a warp bulge applied. There's a little eyeball icon next to it. If you click on that eyeball, it actually turns that effect off. So if you actually want to move around these little lines, it might be a little bit easier to turn off that eyeball first so you can actually see where the endpoints are. And then you can go ahead and manipulate those a little bit faster. But I'm going to select this type again. And to do all these edits, make sure you have the actual type selected when you're going into the appearance window. I'm going to hit where this eyeball icon used to be to turn that effect back on. And if I click on Warp Bulge, that brings up the preview menu for the warp I applied to it. If I turn off preview on this little checkbox right here, you can't see the changes we're making. So if I made some pretty significant changes, you wouldn't be able to tell. But if I turn that preview back on, you can now tell that it made a pretty wild difference. So you want to make sure preview is checked when you're doing this. But this is how you can go ahead and just subtly tweak some of these different effects I've applied to suit the needs of whatever it is you are working on. If you like how the effect looks applied as I said it, you don't have to worry about doing this at all. The same thing applies to ones like this one right here, this word nature. If I select the word nature, it has an effect applied to it, in this case a warp arc. So I can either turn that off, or I can click on that warp arc, make sure preview is selected, and then I can actually adjust the amount that the bend is. I can even go into a negative bend like this if that's something I want to do. It doesn't work well with this logo, but it is a different way to go ahead and do stuff. On ones like this right here that says photography, the word photography and the banner that it is inside is a grouped object. So you want to select that, just turn off this warp arc and then change the type first. It makes it a little bit easier. So I'm going to type in the word easier. And as you can tell, I made all this type center justified, so it's a lot easier to make sure as you type it in, it's already nice and centered. You don't have to rearrange it when you're done. Then just click off this little banner right here and click back on it. And this time, click that eyeball to turn that warp arc back on. you can see that the word easier now follows the path of this banner. It's grouped up like that so that the two different warps don't work separately. It all works together so that the overall appearance looks very consistent. And one last thing that I'm going to go through on Illustrator here, on a lot of these type options, I change the type to make things look a little bit better. So if I take the type tool and just highlight over the word Steven and I go into Window, and then you'll want to make sure that type and then character is selected. So right here on my screen, this is where type character is on. If you don't see all these options on the bottom, up in the upper right hand corner here, there's a down arrow with 4 lines. Click it and make sure you click show options. If you already see these options, it'll say hide options. If you don't, it'll say show options. You want to make sure you show options. So right here is what we're talking about, and it looks like a VA with an arrow pointed left and right, and this is the tracking. And the tracking is just the overall amount of space between each of the letters, and I set this to 44. You can go ahead and change this as much as you want to make sure that the type fits in the overall layout of the design. If I change this to 200, you can tell that it really spaces this type out. So you can make sure you just do that for all the different type to make sure it lines up nicely with the logo that you're working with. Another way you can do this is using the overall horizontal scale. I only use horizontal scale on I think one of these, but horizontal scale works kind of like tracking, except it actually shrinks the width of the letter themselves. So if I do this to, let's say, 50%, you can tell that these letters are now shrunken down to 50%, but at any time I can go back in, change it back to 100%, and we should be good to go. And the reason why I prefer working in Illustrator is I just think the appearance panel is a little bit easier to work with than it is in Photoshop, but either way you should be able to get the job done when you're working with these. But that's all there really is to it. Just make sure if you're working on one of these, group up the entire thing and maybe drag it off to the side or make a new document. Be careful not to save over things accidentally. I like to usually just delete everything I'm not going to use and then just save the file under a new name to prevent any errors. So I'm going to close this window and click no because I don't want to save over what I've already done. So here are the 35 included camera icons that you can go ahead and use. You can just pick whichever one you want. They're all grouped together, so you can just move them off to the side, make them as big or as small as you want. They are vectors, so you can go ahead and not worry about them losing quality. And right here in the fill, you can double click on the fill and select any color you want to change the color of these icons. It's really easy to go ahead and do that. So that's one thing you can do to customize these a little bit. And in Photoshop, I have each of the different camera icons on their own layers. You can kind of go through all these different layers until you see a camera icon that you want to use. And these are all vector smart objects. So let's say I want to make this freaking huge. I can go ahead and do that. If I go ahead and make this massive, if I zoom in on these edges, you can tell they're still nice and crisp because they are a vector smart object. So you don't have to worry about losing quality that way. But that's really all I have to say about using this inside Photoshop. Each of these are on their own separate layers. So just select the camera you want to use, and then you can go ahead and drag it or copy and paste it into a document you want to use it in. And the actual logos in Photoshop work a lot like the Illustrator file, except each of the 14 different logos is in its own folder just to keep things not confusing. And these aren't Photoshop Elements friendly because for some crazy reason Adobe doesn't let you use folders in Photoshop Elements. I have honestly no idea why. I think it's a really silly thing for them to limit folder use inside Elements, but that's just the way it is. So how effects work in Photoshop is very similar to the way they work inside Illustrator, but a couple windows you want open. You want window and then character open. And character is just the overall font name. So if I have nature selected right here, I can change the tracking. Right now it's set to -50. So if I change it to 100 and hit enter, you can tell that these letters are now spaced out more apart. You can also change the type size or even the font through this menu. And the actual effect applied, to change the effect applied on this, just go to type and then warp text. It's right near the middle. If you click on warp text, it brings up the warp dialog box for the particular effect that I've applied. In this case, it is an arc. You can go ahead and adjust the overall bend of this to suit the needs of whatever project it is you're working on. Once you get it to a position that you really like, just hit OK. And you can also hit Control T or Command T on your computer to bring up the free transform, and then just hold Alt and Shift, and that'll go ahead and enlarge or shrink it to scale in place. But that's all there really is to it with this pack. I try to make it really easy to go in there and edit all these things. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask me either on Creative Market. You can reach me on Twitter or even in the comments section of this YouTube video. I'm more than happy to help. But I did do my best to make these really easy to go in there, just customize that type and kind of get going really fast. But that's it for this video, and if you want to see more stuff like this, feel free to subscribe. I put out cool content every week like design tutorials and various design information every week, so if you like stuff like that, please subscribe. It helps me immensely, and thanks so much for watching.